Hi, fourth graders. Today we're reading from Text Collection, Volume 2. Mr. Camel here. We're on page 31. We're reading The Monster Beneath the Sea by Stacia Dutch. All right. The Monster Beneath the Sea. Deep in the ocean, off the coast of Japan, lived a catfish named Namazu. Like all catfish, Namazu didn't need to use his small eyes to find his way through the salty waters. He used his cat-like whiskers to sense the sea around him. With a flick of his tail, he was propelled whichever way he wanted to go. But Namazu was different from the other catfish of the Pacific Ocean in one important way. He was enormous, a monster-sized fish that lived alone in a rocky layer along the ocean floor. Namazu was so large that even the smallest flick of his tail caused giant waves to crash on the shore above and stirred earthquakes throughout the island nation of Japan. When Namazu wiggled, even just a tiny bit, the buildings in Japan rattled, glass windows shattered, shelves collapsed, scattering merchants' goods across floors. Tea spilled. The very earth groaned and cracked. The people knew how to duck their heads and run for shelter. No one was safe when Namazu shook his massive tail. One day, a young artist was at his work table using a sharp chisel to create a woodcut. He'd spent months crafting a detailed representation of the capital city of Edo, where he lived. Painstakingly, he etched out shapes and lines of shops, buildings, streets, and miniature people in an intricate design. The woodcut was nearly finished, ready to be covered with ink and pressed against a sheet of parchment. Very carefully, he set his knife against the block for the final stroke. When far below the sea, Namazu decided it was time to stretch out and move around. The giant catfish inched along the deep, dark surface of the sea. Using his whiskers, he smelled and tasted the sea. He moved past a school of tuna and through a seaweed garden. Then, near a long, rocky coral reef, Namazu raised his tail and smacked it against the ocean floor. Sand splattered. A whirl of water bubbled from the impact. With a boom and a bang, the crust of the earth crumbled. A crack expanded out from the place Namazu's tail slapped down and continued along the sea floor. Energy under the earth's crust built up until it was dangerously stressed, and then it exploded. The entire island of Japan shook violently as the ground quaked. The earthquake knocked over the artist's work table, toppling his tools to the ground. The chisel he'd been using to carve a tiny pagoda slipped, leaving a deep, jagged scratch against the small square of wood. The artist looked at his wood block. It was ruined. Tears filled his eyes. This was not the first time a swoosh of Namazu's tail had caused a quake that destroyed his work. Broken bits of block littered the workshop floor. The artist closed his eyes and sighed. He did not want to start over again. In that moment, he decided to quit and give up his dream of becoming an accomplished artist who would have his work displayed in every home and shop throughout Japan. He would look for a more practical job, one that would not be affected by Namazu's many quakes. Perhaps he should become a bricklayer, repairing the buildings that were constantly toppling down. As the artist began to pack his tools into a canvas bag, he heard commotion outside on the street. He left his studio to discover that people were gathering in the town's central square. "We must do something about Namazu," the baker said. His jacket was covered with spilled rice flour dust and splattered with frosting. "I agree." A woman came from the tea ceremony house, carrying pieces of an ornate broken kettle and shards of ruined teacups. Behind her, parents, children, bankers, chefs, and merchants gathered. The entire town was uniting for an important meeting. "This has gone on too long," the baker said, standing before the assembly. "We must call upon Kashima to help us." A hush settled over the crowd. No one made a sound. "Kashima is too busy to handle this matter," a woman said as she cradled a small baby in her arms. "He is the god of martial arts and must oversee the dojos." Dojos were the training centers for students learning karate, judo, and samurai. "He is the sword god and must visit his shrines," someone else added. The baker said, "Kashima is the only god who can protect us from Namazu." After a long moment, the artist stepped forward. He set down his bag of tools. "I will go. I will ask Kashima for help." The artist heard people talking about his bravery as he left the square, but he didn't feel very brave. He was only doing what he felt was necessary, and he was scared. The artist went to the dojo to find Kashima. The god was in the shrine, listening to prayers and accepting offerings. There was a long line that wrapped around the building. The artist stood in the back and waited his turn. As he moved closer to where the god sat, his knees began to shake. A bead of nervous sweat formed on the artist's forehead. He had never spoken to a god directly before and did not know what to expect. Would the god listen to his request and offer assistance, or would the god laugh and send him away in shame? A woman left the dojo crying. A man walked by smiling. A child came out of the shrine carrying a bag of gold coins. A young couple emerged, arms wrapped happily around each other. When the artist reached the front of the line, he was terrified to be in such a mighty presence. His words felt thick in his throat as he explained about Namazu and the earthquakes. Kashima immediately understood the importance of the artist's plea. He announced, "I will go and speak to Namazu." Grateful and filled with hope, the artist accompanied the god to the seashore and sat down on a decaying dock. He would wait there until Kashima returned. Kashima descended under the sea and found Namazu resting in his lair. "I have come on behalf of the people of Japan," Kashima told the fish. "The earthquakes are destroying their towns. Buildings are unsafe. People are getting hurt. It would be against my nature as a fish not to shake my tail," Namazu said. "You can choose to control yourself," Kashima said. "You must avoid hitting the bottom of the sea. Stop making trouble for the island." "No," Namazu laughed. "I won't. I like to smack my tail on the bottom of the sea. I like it when the earth shakes." "You are putting the island in danger." He raised a sword and demanded, "No more earthquakes." The fish replied with a laugh. Kashima pinned Namazu's tail to the ground with two long blades. The fish gave a mighty roar and, with a great thrust of his body, broke free. "You cannot stop me," Namazu declared. "Watch this, Kashima. I can make small tremors." He wiggled his tail, and the land above shivered. "Or large quakes that will destroy entire cities." Namazu raised his tail, ready to show Kashima his power and destructive force. Kashima looked quickly around. Swords were a mighty weapon, but not solid enough to hold the monster fish. He needed something bigger, stronger, and heavier. Near the lair, Kashima found what he needed. "I have promised to help the people of Japan," Kashima told Namazu. With a mighty roar, Kashima leapt on the great catfish's back. It was well known that Kashima was not only the sword god and the god of martial arts, but he was also an expert at sumo, the Japanese sport of wrestling. The god and fish wrestled, rolling over and over, creating a storm of sand along the ocean floor and a torrent of waves up above. There will always be earthquakes, the fish declared. Not while I am here. Raising a giant rock off the ocean floor, Kashima thrust the rock onto Namazu's back. With all of his might, the catfish tried to get out from under the stone, but he could not free himself. Exhausted, Namazu lowered his tail in defeat. He was trapped, unable to create the smallest earthquake or even a tiny water wave. With Namazu safely imprisoned, Kashima rose to the surface of the water and met the young artist at the shore. "It is done," Kashima announced. "Thank you," the artist said. He gave the god an offering of fruit and flowers. The people of Edo came to the dock to sing Kashima's praises. "I will stay below the ocean and make sure that Namazu does not break free," Kashima told the people. "But I cannot watch him every minute of every day. There are times I must visit my shrines and accept my offerings." Kashima tilted his head toward a fishing boat that floated in the harbor. "When I am gone, Ibisu, the god of the fishermen, will protect the city." "Ibisu is known to fall asleep on the job," the young artist reminded the god in a whisper. "True, it has happened before." Kashima considered the problem. He looked out to the sea, toward the spot where Namazu was secured under the rock. To the artist, he said, "You must create an earthquake warning system. Design an image of Namazu and tell people to place it on roadsides throughout Japan. It's important that the people know what to do if Namazu swishes his tail." "I will begin the artwork right away," the young artist assured Kashima with a quick bow. Kashima bowed low to the men and women of Edo, then turned and disappeared into the sea. Thanks for reading.